Hello everyone and welcome again to the latest edition of Brontë Mania. I'm glad you've been able to join me today, and this video is going to take the channel on a slightly different track to my other videos in the past. So in this video I'm going to try and tell you a bit about my love of the Brontës, how they've inspired me over the years, even with my own writing, but certainly a passion for the great work they produced in their lifetimes, how I came to read their work, and why I find them such fascinating subject matter. So that's the subject of this video today. But before going into any of that, don't forget to click those shares, to give me a big thumbs up if you like the videos I'm putting out, and to click the subscribe button and click also the bell so you can receive all the latest notifications. Thanks in advance for that. So how did I come to like the Brontës in the first place? Well, it goes back to about the 1990s when I first came across their work. I have to admit, like most people who start reading the Brontës, the first books I read of them were two acknowledged masterpieces of the English language, which are Jane Eyre by Charlotte and Wuthering Heights by Emily. This is no real reflection on Anne, as these are such great works, and I believe she wrote two superb novels of her own in Agnes Grey and Tenant of Wildfell Hall. Agnes Grey is such a great description of her time as a governess. Fictionalised, but you can tell a lot of it is based on fact. And The Tenant of Wildfell Hall, which I believe is one of the bravest novels in the Victorian era, about a woman who leaves an abusive husband with a young son in tow and leaves him in the dead of night with a loyal servant and sets up a new life for herself. It's a really powerful story and well worth a read for anyone out there who hasn't read it before. But let's get back to what main purpose of this video is about, which is how I came to like the Brontës and all about that. It was in the 90s anyway, somewhere in the 90s, early to mid 90s, when they came under my microscope as it were, and I came to become an avid reader of their work. I'd like to touch on when I first went to Haworth, when I first visited it. This is tinged with a bit of sadness, I'm afraid to say. It was a joyful experience and everything to go there. I remember very clearly going up to visit my mum and dad in Scotland in September of 2001, to be greeted by my dad at the airport, and first thing he said to me was, "How would you like to take a trip to Haworth with your dad?" I was bowled over by this. It was a complete surprise, and it was like a dream come true that I was actually going to go and visit the homestead of the Brontës. For some reason my mum had the offer to come with us, but she wasn't so keen on going, so it was just my dad and myself that went, and my dad drove us from Scotland all the way to Yorkshire. And when we arrived, we were nearing Haworth, and it's a bit tricky with the directions, so we stopped off, and my dad saw this guy walking up the street, and he was a stereotypical Yorkshireman. He even had a cloth cap on, and my dad went to ask him for directions, and when he came back to the car, my dad came out with the classic typical Yorkshireman, gruff and to the point. But directions were perfect, so it was good, and I've discovered how close, for instance, Keighley is to Haworth, because Keighley was just very short distance from Haworth, which was quite interesting for me because I'd heard a lot about Keighley, and when I've read biographies on the Brontës, and it was interesting to know how close the two places were to one another. So when we went there, and then went round the parsonage, it was a continuation of the dream to walk in the footsteps of the Brontes. It was magical to me, going from one room to the other and imagining Charlotte, Emily, Anne, not forgetting Branwell, and in former years, of course, Maria and Elizabeth, as well as Patrick and Aunt Branwell, them all being there. It's cast a bit of a spell on me, I must say. It was just such a great experience. We also visited the church, which is really great. There's one interesting thing as well. When you go to the parsonage, I was amazed to find the Black Bull Inn was just across the street and a few yards up the road. It surprised me that, because when Branwell, there's stories about Branwell in the last days of his life, when he was coming home from the Black Bull Inn after one of his nightly binges there, he was walking up the street, and the way it was described, it was like it was miles away to the parsonage. He was staggering up this road, and it was such a stroll to get in. And then when I discovered it was just almost next door, it was a bit bizarre, but that showed you the bad condition Branwell was in at the time, as the effects of tuberculosis, or consumption, as they said in Victorian times, took the hold on him. Just another aspect of the sad part of the Bronte story. There's always this air of blackness around them, with death hanging in the air at times. But on the more positive slant, that night we actually stayed overnight at Haworth at the Three Sisters Hotel, which is a great name for a hotel in Haworth. And they also had a Branwell bar, which is it's quite amusing when you think about it. In fact, I've got a thing with the Brontes, how they inspire me. When I was at school, in my art classes, I was absolutely hopeless at art, but since I've got this love of the Brontes, I've taken to sketching aspects of their lives, whether it's pictures of them or locations attributable to them. And that is, I've been amazed at the results they've come up with. This is one of them. Since we're talking about the Black Bull Inn, this is actually a sketch of the Black Bull Inn. Isn't a bad one. So yeah, that's one of the Black Bull Inn. Well, about with these sketches, I might show a few others. This is a bit of a dual sketch. It shows the parsonage from the outside, and also from the inside. It's got bottom part of the sketch is actually the main hallway leading up to the stairs. So yeah, it's quite interesting. Look at it. Yeah, there's the parsonage there. It's interesting that main staircase on the first level is a grandfather clock there, and story goes that when Patrick Bronte, the father, he always used to wind up the clock when he went to bed, usually about 9 o'clock, and he would always say to his, especially in latter years, to his daughters, Charlotte, Emily and Anne, who lived to adulthood, saying that you're just going to bed and don't stay up too late. My dad, when I visited Mum and Dad, always used to say that to me as well. So yeah, that was I thought that was really cool, that part. And this next sketch is based on an almost idealised view of the Bronte Parsonage by Mrs. Gaskell. It was a really artistic portrayal of it, not exactly as it was, but yeah. And this is one I did of that. Parsonage there. Got the church and some like Sunday school buildings, I think they are, and then they've got the graves. That's particular one I'm pretty proud of, that one. And then we have a collective of the Brontes. This picture's Charlotte Branwell, Emily and Anne, and it also has Patrick and Aunt Branwell in the picture, so it's a real family portrait. And this is it. There's Patrick and Aunt Branwell. Moving up, you got Branwell and Anne, and then Charlotte and Emily at the bottom. So it's quite interesting. Well, let's say is that when we went to Haworth and we were relaxing in the hotel after going around the parsonage and the church. Side note, it was 2001 when we went to the Brontë Parsonage, and that was the height of the foot and mouth disease in England, which is unfortunate, so we weren't allowed to go into the moors, which is a bit of a shame for me. So that was unfortunate, that part of it. And the sad aspect I was speaking of, unfortunately, my dad, towards the end of that same year, 2001, it was discovered my dad had a brain tumour, and he passed away in the May of the following year, so that's where I say it's a bit tinged with sadness. But it was just great to, looking back on it, especially to spend a great experience at Haworth with my dad. It meant a lot looking back. And yeah, when we went back to the hotel afterwards, I always remember I was writing in my notepad, trying to remember everything I could about all the different rooms we went to and all I saw. So it was like a immediate reaction of everything I saw. So it's quite a good recollection in that respect, and I still have that notebook. Well, not the notebook, but the sheets of paper that I wrote in. And hopefully in a future video I can dig those pages out and read some of them out, because it will be quite a nice little account of my impressions of being in Haworth and at the parsonage. And I also like in this video to mention something that happened that evening when we were having dinner at the hotel. I always remember this. It's been one of the most difficult questions I've ever had to answer, when my dad said, "Mark, which Brontë sister do you think was the most talented writer?" That's what I call a difficult question. I thought about it quite a while and weighed up the pros and cons, and eventually I decided I'd have to go for Emily, because I just think Wuthering Heights is such an incredibly powerful novel. Some of it is just blows your mind, the stuff that she came up with, particularly the interchanges between Heathcliff and Cathy, when Cathy speaks to her servant Nellie Dean, especially that immortal line, "I am Heathcliff." That's just so deep, it isn't true. And yeah, I know that some people have a difficult time with Wuthering Heights because it's not such an easy novel to get into at first, and with the different similar sounding names and stuff, it can be a bit tricky, but if you get past that, you're in for a real treat, because it is deservedly rated still one of the greatest novels of all time, and it always will be. And that you can say that for a lot of the Brontë novels, because they are really special. But I won't like to end this video without adding a little bit about Branwell, because it's a shame how he's been overshadowed at times by his sister's work, because I know he wasn't as disciplined as them, and he lost track and things. But when you read some of his poetry he put out, I mean, some of that is just terrific, and he was a very skillful writer in his own way, but sadly circumstances in his life overtook him, and it all just didn't happen for him. That's just one of those sad suppose you could say it's another aspect of the sad story of the Brontës. But there's plenty of uplifting stories about them, and it's just always a great thrill to read their work. And I always love reading biographies about them as well. It just makes me feel I'm closer to them, and that's something I really enjoy. So that's the end of this video. Thank you again for tuning in, and look forward to seeing you again next time, and hopefully I can dig out those notes from when I visit Haworth and share them with you. Thanks for now. Bye.